Hi, my name is Mykayla, and I'm the author of the Little Monsters series. It was a total accident. I was a sophomore in college, and I had a friend who wound up being my illustrator. She was an art student for a different university, and she called me one day and she said, "Hey, listen, I have to illustrate a short story for my final semester project. Would you write me a short story?" And I said, "Oh, sure." And I was sitting in my apartment, and Twilight had just come out on Netflix. And so, for those of you who don't know, Twilight came out and got its glory days when I was a teenager. And so I had this whole vampire romance obsession phase. I was watching it in my apartment when she called me. And so all of a sudden I was like, I'll write a story about Vlad. That's Dracula's kid. It'll be short and sweet. And the original version of that first story was actually about half the length of what it is now. It was just short enough for her to make a project out of it. That was the goal. And her class blew up loving it so much that she called me again at the end of the semester and said, "Hey, would you write this longer?" And I was like, "Oh, you want to actually do this? Because I want to be an author and you want to be an illustrator. I've got this. I've got this." Honestly, I think the whole story took me maybe 10 minutes to write. It took a lot longer to edit, but the whole Vlad's First Fang story was done in minutes. And it took off so well. It got a much better response than I ever dreamed that it would possibly get. So I was like, well, I guess I could do this again, maybe with the other monsters. I don't know. I grew up loving Halloween. And so I just was like, why not? Why not? And so now it's planned out to be a series of 10. And Frankie's First Stitch just got released as book 2. My whole thinking on it is that, well, Vlad's First Fang was about losing your very first tooth. So another milestone kids go through all the time is like breaking a bone. And so that's Frankie gets his arm injured. He has to have stitches put in. You're afraid of the doctor. And I think that this story is such a good driving force for showing kids their own milestones through this lens of classic monsters that they'll be exposed to over time. And so that's what the Little Monsters series is meant to do, is to show all of these different things that kids have to deal with over time, fears of the dark, learning how to swim, stage fright, things like that, which of course, those books are yet to come, but they will. I was 18 when I successfully published Vlad's First Fang. I didn't know that it's much easier to get responses from publishing houses if you have an agent and if you are experienced. They're much more likely to talk to you. I also didn't have enough money, say, to get all of these books printed. It's a much more expensive process, I think, than most people realize. So I ran a Kickstarter campaign, which is basically crowdfunding, where I put together this very amateur video that was like, "Hi, I wrote a book, please buy it." And I think it was the charm of my youth that actually made that successful, if we're frank. But I got enough money to have them printed, and so I did that myself. And I didn't want legally to run into any problems with not having an LLC or a business label that was behind those books. And so Fontaine House Publishing was born with that. But when I finally did publish Frankie's First Stitch, I ran the Kickstarter. It was much more successful than I thought it was going to be. I also made a coloring book. I figured, why not? This is for kids. I can make these supplementary materials. And so now there's bookmarks, stickers, buttons, pins. Like, I finally feel like I have a grip on how to publish anything. It feels huge to me. It feels huge to have kids dress up like my characters for Halloween. I had one little girl dress up like one of my characters for a book project for school. I've had kids come to me and tell me it's their favorite book. I've had parents tell me that their kids won't go to sleep without hearing one of my stories. And I know how some of those books were for me as a kid, that were just influential. And it astounds me that I am going to be this unseen force behind a title and behind the cover of a book for some of these kids who years from now will remember, this was a book that I read and loved, and I want to read this to my own kid. So it's awesome. But now I'm here for my book release, and it was big. There were kids here and people were excited and they wanted to give my books away as gifts. And I have scrawled my signature in so many books than I thought I was going to in one day. It's so cool. So the official title release is not until later this year, so I cannot give you that, but I can give you the basics that it does involve a little pinch of magic, and it is a book about spells. and a little witch who has trouble with them. What inspired me to write children's books is very different than what just made me want to be a writer to begin with. My children's books were a total accident. I never would have told you 10 years ago that I was going to be a children's book author. It wasn't in my 10-year plan, okay? I was very organized when I went off to college. I knew what I wanted, and it was going to be just like this ABC. And then the inspiration for this children's book got thrown in my lap. But there was this book when I was little that made me want to write. And the thing that made me want to write was being read to. I can tell you that I have had the same copy since I was 4 years old. And it's on a shelf with other books that match its color scheme. I really built a shrine to this thing because I love it. But it's called Sir Small and the Dragonfly. And it is about a knight named Sir Small who has a ant for a steed, and he carries a shield that is the size of a penny and a sword that is the size of a pin. And no, those proportions don't make any sense. And yes, it is my favorite story ever. And yes, the illustrations are beautiful. And my dad would read it to me so often, and he always did the voices. That book was so influential. I was like, I want to write something just like this someday. But what it did was it made me want to write medieval fantasy world stories. That was where that really came from. I think it's just ironic now that I've grown up wanting to write fantasy fiction, leaning on this inspiration from a children's book without the intention of writing children's books. And now that's what I do anyway.